Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this kickoff of today's offerings to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the birth of Henry Mancini. I am Sue Vita, the Chief of the Music Division, and today's presentation, I'm very much looking forward to it. I can tell that you are too. Heard on the small screen, music in Jack Arnold and Henry Mancini's episodes of Peter Gunn. This is one of the couple per year installments in a lecture series that the Music Division of the Library of Congress puts on in consort with the American Musicological Society. And this is something that we cooked up, I don't know, maybe 20 years ago? Has it been 20 years? And it is, it's one of those success stories. It was, why don't we try this? And then it has been so popular that we didn't want to let it go. So we are delighted to cooperate with them and to regularly meet some of the wonderful scholars that use the collections in the Library of Congress and then turn it into really great tidbits to share with people like you. It is going to be, will be virtual and will be televised. It will be recorded so that it can be used in classrooms and other settings. And so the reach will go beyond the people that are sitting in the room today. Let's see. So over the past decade, we have been fortunate to learn about a variety of topics from Schoenberg to Showboat. Today, we turn to Henry Mancini and his iconic music for the television series, Peter Gunn. As always, we are recording, so it will be available to watch. Past lectures are already available online. And I think you probably noticed, but just make sure you are aware that there's a really great smattering of the parts of the collection that Paul has pulled out for you just to illustrate some of the things that we've seen in the Peter Gunn part of Henry Mancini's collection. So I hope you'll take time to take a look at that. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Allen Sommerfeld, Senior Music Reference Specialist and AMS Council Member, who will introduce our speaker. So thank you.
Thank you, Sue. So it is my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Reba Wisner is an Associate Professor of Musicology and Coordinator of the Public Musicology Certificate at the Joyce and Henry Schwab School of Music at Columbus State University. Primarily a television and film music historian, she has also published and presented on 17th century Venetian opera, Italian-American immigrant musical theater, video game music, and music history pedagogy. She is the author of several books, including A Dimension of Sound, Music in the Twilight Zone, We Will Control All That You Hear, The Outer Limits and the Aural Imagination, Music in the Atomic Bomb on American Television 1950 to 1969, and published just this year, David Lynch, Sonic Style. Her fifth book, Universal Design for Learning in Music History Classes, A Teacher's Guide, is under contract with Routledge. And with Catherine Reed, she co-edited Music in Twin Peaks, Listen to the Sounds. She is currently working on 2 edited collections, Adaptation, Music, and Screen Media, and also the Oxford Handbook of Public Musicology. In addition to her books, journal articles, and book chapters, her work can be found in places such as the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, Musicology Now, and on various podcasts, television DVD commentaries, and film music documentaries. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Wisner.
Thank you. Before I begin today, there's a few people I'd like to thank. First, the American Musicological Society for co-sponsoring this with the Library of Congress, especially Siobhan Walker and Haley Garrick. Library of Congress, of course, especially Paul Sommerfeld. Two people who aided me in this research locally, Brittany Bybalt and Katisha Bonham. And the Mancini estate, especially Felice Mancini, who provided me permissions to show the images in today's talk. Best known for his film directing, Jack Arnold also directed over 200 television episodes in different genres, including westerns, science fiction, comedies, and procedurals. So while it's unsurprising that much of the research on Arnold's works focus on his films and directorial practices, it is surprising that there is little research on these television episodes and virtually no literature on their music. One of Arnold's television series was Peter Gunn, created by Blake Edwards. A discussion in of the music in this series episodes, composed by Henry Mancini, is important because music helps to heighten Arnold's directorial choices in 6 of the 114 episodes of the series. Peter Gunn first ran on NBC from September 1958 to June 1960, and then moved to ABC from October 1960 to September 1961. And Peter Gunn provides an important example of music reflecting directorial choices for 2 reasons. First, this is the first television series for which every episode has an original score rather than use of any library music, something I will discuss shortly, and the first series that uses a jazz score. There was another first too, in that there was a tight relationship between the visuals and the score in a way that has never been done before. In this series, jazz essentially becomes a narrator. Further, the series was a sort of television noir, located in the seedy, corrupt, and crime-ridden part of a dark American city, for which Arnold had to account when directing and Mancini had to consider when writing the score. In this talk today, I'll plot out Mancini's compositional process as a reflection of Arnold's directing choices by using these 6 episodes of Peter Gunn as a case study. I'll discuss how the composition of music amplifies Arnold's directorial choices and how it works in the series run. As a crime drama, which differed from much of Arnold's other works, he had to fit the show's parameters when directing, and Mancini had to compose a jazz score with consideration of the episode's plot, script, and Arnold's directing style. Though Henry Mancini is best known for his over 100 film scores, themes such as that for the Pink Panther and songs such as Moon River, his musical beginnings were rather humble. He studied piano, orchestration, and composition at the Juilliard School in New York City after transferring from the Carnegie Institute of Technology. In 1943, he enlisted in the Army, where he made musical connections. After World War II ended, he began working for famed band leader Glenn Miller as a pianist and arranger. He soon moved to Universal's music department, composing scores for films such as The Creature from the Black Lagoon, directed by Jack Arnold in 1954, Breakfast at Tiffany's, directed by Blake Edwards in 1961, and The Pink Panther, directed by Blake Edwards in 1963. And these were his first collaborations with both Edwards and Arnold. In his score for Touch of Evil, directed by Orson Welles in 1958, Mancini began writing in the jazz, blues, rock fusion genre, what John Capps describes as, quote, a combination of pop melody and jazz inflections of the so-called West Coast cool school, end quote. And this became his signature compositional style for his television scores, including Peter Gunn. In addition to Touch of Evil, 2 other scores are credited together with changing the sound of film and television music. The Man with the Golden Arm, directed by Otto Preminger in 1955, and the scores for Peter Gunn. One 1958 NBC trade release for an album of Peter Gunn's music quoted a description of the music as, quote, angular, modern jazz rhythms, contemporary music for a contemporary show, end quote. This jazz-tinged show, combined with beat culture, ushered in a new type of stylized detective series, both through sight and sound, that would flourish throughout the 1960s. But even from the first announcements of the show, its music was described as modern jazz. However, we can trace jazz's use in the detective genre as early as 1950s film noir, when jazz became synonymous with mystery. This musical association paralleled the topical association of these noir crime series, which all followed a basic narrative structure that carried over from film noir. Though film noir and television noir can slightly differ, they often have soundtracks with similar styles. Mancini noted that his approach to writing film and television music were not all that different, so it was easy for him to adapt his classic scoring style into the television medium. Jazz and bebop were common in television shows featuring rebellion, murder, blackmail, crime, kidnapping, or the seedy side of urban life, including the presence of gangsters and criminals. There are other associations with jazz, such as that with alcohol, drugs, racism, and poverty, that some term as jazz myths. In Peter Gunn, the locale of the diegetic jazz, or jazz that both we and the characters on screen can hear, was centered in a club called Mother's, a refuge for the eponymous character played by Craig Stevens, rather than a place of danger. This was partially because this was Gunn's unofficial office, and partially that's because this where his girlfriend, Edie Hart, who played by Lola Albright, was a lounge singer. The series' music was inseparable from the show, and often its narrative. In an interview in the October 2nd, 1958 issue of Downbeat magazine, Mancini told journalist John Tyner that, quote, "I give them a dramatic undercurrent and let them blow as they like. The result is that you can't separate the content from the jazz. That's how close it is," end quote. He also noted that Peter Gunn was, quote, "the first television film series in which modern jazz integrated fully with the dramatic action," end quote. Similarly, Nonine Connor wrote, quote, "Jazz is the musical metal of Peter Gunn, with scores so artfully woven into the fabric of the plot that one cannot be separated from the other. Mancini's beat sets the mood, heightens the suspense, speeds the action, and sometimes puts over an actual point in the story," end quote. Mancini's Peter Gunn scores were even touted as an example for how modern jazz should be used in television advertisements, with Chet Gerlach, a group head of television and radio at the McCann Erickson Advertisement Agency, explaining that the seamless integration of modern jazz with the plot of Peter Gunn is a good example for any producer of television commercials. Some writers, such as George F. Weiland for Broadcasting Magazine in 1961, even went as far as crediting the series' success to its music. Given its improvisational style, jazz was not a natural fit for television, which required that music stay within a particular and predictable constraint. But the choice to hire Mancini for the scores was not arbitrary either. Rather, he had proven experience as both a composer, arranger, and jazz musician. At the time of hire, Mancini was not working, having just left Universal to become an independent composer and arranger due to budget cuts. While out for a haircut on the Universal lot, because all former employees still had their lot pass, the series producer Blake Edwards told him about the new series when he ran into him and asked him if he'd like to write its music. Edwards described this collaboration as, quote, "I had Henry Mancini write a special music score, and we used live music on the show," end quote. However, none of these initial discussions ever explicitly included Mancini's composition of jazz, though Edwards weaved music into every episode's narrative, making it plausible. Edwards remarked that he believed that at least half of the series' success came from Mancini's music, and Mancini notably also received half of the fan mail. Mancini found composing new and fresh music for every episode a challenge, because each score had to be distinctive from the others that came before it, and for every episode that came after it. In reality, each 30-minute episode had roughly 15 minutes of music, sometimes more, some of which was already composed and reused, such as the teaser music titled Fallout, with a closely mic'd repetitive walking bass, and the one-chord rock-tinged Peter Gunn theme in every episode. Though recorded in mono and with poor recording technology on MGM's soundstage, the close miking of all the instruments together, especially the bass and drums in both the theme and cues, combined with raising the upper and lower ends of the mix in the dubbing room, created a rich sound that could easily be conveyed over the era's small and not very powerful television speakers. The orchestra for Peter Gunn scores used 17 musicians. It originally had 13 in the first season, 3 alto flutes, doubling on bass flutes, 1 trumpet, 4 trombones, vibraphone, piano, double bass, guitar, and drums. but its orchestra was actually often larger than 17 musicians. For example, each woodwind player doubled on one or more instruments, often totaling 27 woodwind instruments alone. This ensemble does not include the 5-piece band that always performed at Mother's, which Mancini called chamber jazz. He decided that because the series' jazz club setting, he would not use any strings, but he also couldn't notoriously afford to hire strings. One reason was because $2,000 of the music budget was allocated for the episode. And this $2,000 budget had to cover Mancini's fee, the copyist, and the musician's pay. The average budget of a single episode, to put it into context, is $38,000. So $2,000 of it was allotted to music. So music was allotted over about 5% of the budget. Mancini revealed in his 1962 orchestration book, Sounds and Scores, A Practical Guide to Professional Orchestration, that he used 2 particular techniques when writing his scores for Peter Gunn. One technique was to combine horns and trombones into thick, lush chords that move together. Another was to combine various saxophones, specifically alto, tenor, and baritone, in close voicings as they blend together well in every combination. Almost all of Mancini's music for the series and beyond uses a walking bass. The cues using walking bass, combined with blaring trumpets and bass flute, created the series' sonic signature because it occurred so frequently. The series consistently used jazz both dramatically and comedically. Mancini used this walking bass to sometimes unify a crime sequence, similar to what he does in the teaser Fallout cue. He also incorporates short stingers and bridges, and sometimes uses a recurring theme for a particular character. Though he composed new music for each episode, occasionally he would reuse music from a previous episode. Mancini remarked that when it came to composing for television, he was directly influenced by, quote, what was on the screen and what he had to write for, end quote, while still, quote, thinking past the obvious if the scene will take it, end quote. There were still some other innovations, including, as Mancini put it, quote, unique kinds of playing techniques, fall-offs on the ends of notes and things like that were used dramatically, the use of bass flutes and alto flutes for dramatic uses and to take the place of a string section, end quote. Though flutes are not typically jazz instruments, Mancini incorporated them in lieu of strings because he was a flutist and he knew that the emotion conveyed by a string section could easily be supplanted by flutes in different ranges. Mancini had become known by the time of Peter Gunn with his compositional style that he, quote, individualized with his own developing sense of style and timbre, end quote. And he never considered his compositional style as being set. So he consistently interpolated new and popular styles into his score. The consistent decline of feature film production, for which Jack Arnold spent many years as a contract director for Universal, necessitated his move to directing television. His first partnership in television was a producer-director split between he and Blake Edwards on Peter Gunn that then continued for Mr. Lucky, which ran on CBS from October 1959 to June 1960. It seemed obvious then that Arnold was tasked to direct 5 episodes of Peter Gunn while Edwards took a 6-week leave to direct Operation Petticoat, and an additional episode in season 2. Like any other director, Arnold had different constraints and limitations with which he had to work when directing. In this case, he had to work with the confines of a style that Edwards already established, while also exercising his own directorial creativity. Since Mancini was a series house composer, Arnold inherited this working relationship. However, Peter Gunn was not the first collaboration between Arnold and Mancini, as I discussed earlier, so they knew each other's habits and styles. So by the time Mancini was tasked with composing for Peter Gunn, he already had a sense of Arnold's directing style, at least for film, and what that would mean for his scoring. To accurately discuss how Mancini made his musical choices, I must first discuss Arnold as a director to put these 6 episodes of Peter Gunn into perspective. We know that Arnold storyboarded the films he directed to plot out his directing choices, but it's unknown whether he did the same for his television episodes, though it's conceivable that he might have, considering his role as the episode's storyteller. His directing style has been, quote, described as, quote, clean, spare, down to earth, end quote. This style stemmed from necessity in his early directing career, in which he developed a lean, efficient narrative style, typified by extreme deliberation and a very low shooting ratio that included fluid camera movements. This directing style has several characteristics. Arnold was able to maximize his minimal resources, and he often builds suspense by engaging the audience's imagination. His pacing tends to be quick yet controlled. His mise-en-scenes tend to be creative, including his atmospheric interplay of light and darkness in the cinematography, stemming from his work in film noir. And the interacular point of, within this cinematography, he often considers the placement of stereographic photography an interocular point of convergence, which dictates how an object will project or recede from the screen. As a result of his film noir experience is his use of strong imagery to compensate and strengthen weak scenes. His stagings and visuals have been described as interesting, while his storytelling tends to be simultaneously straightforward and realistic, likely from both his artful choice of shooting locations and his speed to low shooting ratio. He spends time establishing his environments, not only through establishing shots, but also through his carefully chosen camera angles and atmospheric shots. He avoids flashback scenes, only telling the story through the present. His attention to detail preserves the credibility of the storytelling. In an interview with Dana Reems, Arnold noted, quote, "The fabric of film is made up of details. If the details are correct, the whole picture will come out. These little touches are very important. Even if they go by quickly, you get it almost subliminally," end quote. Although Arnold's specific directing style was limited by the project on which he was working, his mise-en-scenes tended to be always inventive, even for an established show like Peter Gunn, where he worked the style into this existing style that was created by Edwards. Mancini noted of film, and presumably television, that it was a director's medium, which Arnold agreed with. Mancini could get some ideas from reading the script, but he really couldn't do any composing until he saw the film and something he said triggered him. But this was also standard practice. By the time Mancini composed an episode's score, the film was already in the rough cut stage. He would first meet with the director, producer, and music supervisor to discuss the overall approach of the score, including ideas for when, where, and how any musical themes should be used. Then he would write those themes. After that step, he, with the music supervisor and music editor, and sometimes the film editor and sound effects editor, attended a spotting session where they would watch the episode's final cut and decide where the non-diegetic music should go, which is music that only we can hear, what kind of music it needed, and how long it would last. The diegetic music was usually already filmed in with the rough cut. Once these decisions were made, Mancini began composing with timing sheets that the music department provided to ensure that the music would be accurately synced to the picture. They often gave him the film to rewatch at home during the composition phase. And if you look at enough of these timing sheets, sometimes you'll find things that look like long division problems. And because it's down to like the fraction of a second to make sure things are actually syncing up properly. Mancini would compose the next score in the schedule between Thursday and Sunday, and then record so that episode could air on the following Tuesday night. This tight deadline was compounded by his simultaneous work composing for Mr. Lucky. It took him roughly 10 hours to compose a single episode score, plus additional time for the spotting session, rewatching it to compose, and quality controlling the final product after the music was dubbed onto the film. For Peter Gunn, Mancini's scoring included, quote, fully developed melodies, character themes for guest stars, unique anthems for specific episodes, and a variety of lengthy cues for the establishing montages that often open an episode or divide interior acts, end quote. One of his trademarks was the use of melody to both accompany and influence a particular scene. In fact, Mancini remarked that for Peter Gunn, Edwards, quote, wanted music written for each scene portrayed, end quote. So it stands to reason that Arnold's choices naturally determine Mancini's choices. The Library of Congress holds Mancini's scores, detailed music timings, and teleplays for Arnold's 6 Peter Gunn episodes, along with a variety of other materials, including Mancini's biography, which has a whole chapter on Peter Gunn, as well as scrapbooks that talk about the success of the series. They reveal his scoring approach, and not just for these episodes, for the entire run of the series. The music for Peter Gunn is in the form of sketches, conductor scores that are not fully orchestrated, which is unusual for the time, and parts for the instrumentalist to use during recording sessions. Mancini writes the cue's instrumentation on the cover of the conductor score with the cues for the entrances or melodies of particular instruments. So even if it's not fully orchestrated, he has an indication of what instrument should be used. As a detective, Peter Gunn had the traditional characteristics of other television detectives at the time. As Frank A. Salamone writes, quote, "The hard-boiled here is more interested in discovering justice and bringing it about. Moreover, in that quest, the evildoers seek to intimidate him while also trying to tempt him, and later on her, meaning Edie Hart, to the easy life of wealth and power. The hero must make some sort of personal choice, a moral decision, rather than simply solving a case. Another way of saying this is that the hero has a personal involvement in the action. He may know the victim, but he may also learn to know himself and how he reacts to the crime and the entire situation. Moreover, the detective must define his own morality. This fact often leads to his rejecting the common view that society holds as morality," end quote. So Arnold also had to consider Gunn's characteristics and the situations in which he found himself in each episode when directing. One challenge that Arnold had was to remain faithful to the script he was given and to Peter Gunn's established characteristics while putting his own directorial seal on it. Unlike with past projects, he likely was unable to change elements of the dialogue for the Peter Gunn scripts. Each Peter Gunn episode followed the same typical format of the era shows. It opened with a short teaser from the episode's crime, accompanied by the fallout cue, then the title sequence accompanied by the Peter Gunn theme, and then 3 acts closing with the credits. There are a few commonalities among Arnold's Peter Gunn episodes, namely his use of camera angles. He usually starts his teasers by panning upward from a character's feet to their head. And so Mancini had to do the same thing as Arnold. He basically had to replicate musically what Arnold was doing on the director's side. But he also had to consider the series' music writ large, which he had an advantage because he wrote all of the scores for it. It's not like he had to actually work with other people's scores. One thing that Mancini did was compose with a sense of chiaroscuro, or a contrast between light and dark timbres, or high and low notes, and thick and thin textures. He called himself, quote, "a creature of texture," end quote, noting that he was acutely aware of how instruments blend, and when and what instruments should be doubled, and how chords should be voiced. Shows like Peter Gunn used chiaroscuro to create a sort of half-world of endless shadows, threatening shapes, and constant danger. He achieved this through a constant interplay between the alto and bass flutes, the latter of which Mancini noted that he used explicitly for dark effects, and the trumpets and trombones, of which he often changed the timbre by using different mutes. Mimicking the awkward and unpredictable way that light enters into dark spaces in television noirs, Mancini used sometimes angular melodies and even improvisatory sections that were full of movement, and he typically composed his underscoring with walking bass lines to represent that perpetual motion. He also capitalized on the sense of paranoia found in many of the episodes, and wrote descending, falling-like figures in the bass flute to create that effect. This effect appeared in so many cues that it became one of the series' sonic trademarks. When Arnold arrived on the scene, the first episode he was to direct was a little past the first season's midpoint, which meant that viewers would know the episode's format and he could not deviate from it. This first episode was The Ugly Frame, which was episode 24 of season 1 from 1959. In this episode, Eli Gans, played by John Blyfer, the owner of the diner that a teenage Lieutenant Jacoby, played by Herschel Bernard, used to frequent, is cruelly murdered for $14 in the cash register. As he was dying, Gans identifies his assailant as Jimmy Blaine, played by Jimmy Murphy. After Jacoby attempts to find Blaine, he finds him dead. As it turns out, Mickey Coit, played by Lewis Charles, framed Jacoby for his murder, and Gunn spends the rest of the episode attempting to absolve him of wrongdoing. One of the cues that does an excellent job of depicting the episode's noir aspect is Dead Kid, which we hear when Lieutenant Jacoby, who's just entered the seedy motel, moves Blaine's body, and we see that he's dead. The cue opens with alto flutes and vibraphones playing sustained minor seconds, which creates a harsh sound to our ears, which begins as Blaine's body hits the bed. Mancini does not indicate if the vibraphone's motor should be on or off, which would change the instrument's timbre. Almost immediately in the cue, we hear thick brass chords underneath and a twanging guitar played in its lower register, which in this case actually serves as the cue's melody. This melody does not follow a clear melodic pattern, but we also cannot anticipate when it will enter, just as we could not anticipate that the hotel clerk, played by Shep Sanders, would come into the room to ask Jacoby why he assaulted the man laying on the bed. The cue moves just as slowly as Jacoby. With the exception of a little light behind Jacoby, the majority of the room is dark, reflecting the cue's timbre. Ultimately, after trying, I was unable to make contact with the rights holder for the Peter Gunn episodes. So the video clips in this talk may not appear in the recording. I will, however, provide timestamps for those who have access to the episodes so that those of you who are watching later can pause and watch the clip, or those of you who are watching again later on can go back and watch it. This first clip that I'm going to discuss starts at 14 minutes and 6 seconds and goes to 15 minutes and 4 seconds.
Separate the force below. Why'd you beat him up? I didn't touch him, and you know it. I only know what I'm looking at. He's dead, isn't he? I'm going to report you, Lieutenant. That badge of yours don't give you any license to be killed.
Another episode that Arnold directed was Keep Smiling, which was the next episode, episode 26 of season 1, also from 1959. In this episode, a group of bowlers are in town for a bowling conclave. Two men, Frank, played by Mario Gallo, and Phil, played by David Cross, are out to blackmail any of the bowlers they want by photographing them kissing a woman named Emily, played by Mara Corday, who also works with them. Gunn and Jacoby go undercover at a jazz club called Shelley's Manhole, where Shelley Mann and his quintet are playing, to try and catch these blackmailers. At the club, the quintet's diegetic music is playing a cue called My Man Shelley that Mancini originally composed for The Ugly Frame, but it was not used in that episode. Here, it's used to set the scene in Shelley's Manhole, and it was likely that Arnold and Mancini decided that the cue would fit better in this episode. In the episode's title cue, Mancini indicates solos for several instruments, which he marks in the score as solo ad-lib, where he specifies solos from the baritone, saxophone, and vibraphone. The majority of the score features either chords periodically or short melodic snippets for melodic instruments. Once again, as in Dead Kid from The Ugly Frame, the music indicated in the Keep Smiling cue is in each of the instrument's lower register, highlighting the episode's noir aspect. The exception is in the last 6 measures, in which Mancini writes open-voiced ninth chords, common in jazz, including in 3 of the instrument's extreme upper registers, creating a stark contrast with the rest of the cue, giving it a sense of illumination among the darkness. In Love Me to Death, episode 31 of season 1, also from 1959, Henry Bowers, played by Robert H. Harris, is a habitual wife killer, and he's married Maggie Goffney, played by Jeanette Nolan, who has 2 sisters, played by Helen Wallace and Ellen Corby, who are overprotective of her and their family's wealth. They, with their family's lawyer, James Bond, played by Lucien Littlefield, goes to Mother to ask Gunn for help with finding out about Bowers. Before their entrance, Edie sings Mancini's song Straight to Baby, which was the first Mancini song written specifically for the mother scenes. And what's fun, if you actually see Mancini making a cameo right there in that circle, sitting at a table in the lower left side. Gunn searches and soon discovers that Bowers spent time in prison for forgery. Maggie doesn't believe that he's capable of committing a crime, but Bowers admits that he did and claims that he's reformed. However, Maggie's sisters refuse to give him another chance. Suddenly, one, then both sisters are discovered dead in accidents, and Gunn suspects that Bowers killed them. He tries to keep Maggie away from Bowers, knowing he will kill her, given his history of previous wives' mysterious deaths. After tracking Bowers down, we learn that it was Maggie who killed her sisters, because she was afraid they would prevent any love that she would have. Gunn gets into a scuffle with Bowers, and we quickly realize that Bowers rigged the light to electrocute whoever touched it. And Maggie was the intended victim. Mancini continues his tradition of asking for solos in this episode, and he asks for a long vibraphone solo in the cue Hot Flashes. But this episode was one exception to Mancini's lack of violins in the scoring. Because the narrative necessitated that Gunn go into a restaurant and meet the Gothney sisters where, quote, they play waltzes, he composed two diegetic violin and accordion cues called Dark Eyes, which actually is not a waltz, given the meter in which Mancini writes the cue, and as he typed on the page of the detailed timing notes, Gypsy Music, and handwrote the title Sasha and Pasha, which is a waltz. In fact, Dark Eyes resembles more of an emotional virtuosic solo than a duet. This clearly reflects Mancini's composition for what the narrative necessitated, including Bowers telling Maggie that he would be happier if they could move away from her sisters. And again, this is an example of the script actually dictating what kind of music should be put into the episode. This particular clip begins at 5 minutes and 43 seconds and ends at 6 minutes and 47 seconds.
Close to your nose.
Yes.
I thought so.
Oh, Henry, I'm the happiest woman in the world.
I could be the happiest man in the world if we were away from here and away from our sisters. They're bent on destroying us, Maggie.
Henry, nothing they can ever do could turn me against you. Nothing in the world.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was taking a picture of this young lady.
There are also places in the score where Mancini wants to match the sonic effects with what occurs in the narrative, especially to draw the audience member in by their ears rather than their eyes. In the cue Maggie's Blues, he writes that the guitarist should play with their fingers, no pick. By using a pick, the strings vibrate differently than when played with fingers, achieving a brighter, louder, and more consistent sound that creates a certain effect in the musical context, and a stark sound combined with the on-screen lighting. This cue also uses another instrument in a solo that Mancini typically did not use in his Peter Gunn scores, English horn, and in a blues cue, no less, which creates a dark, nasal sound that highlights the melody. A slightly different scenario is found in Bullet for a Badge, which is episode 34 of season 1, which features a setup whereby an anonymous tipster claims to have information for Lieutenant Jacoby, but instead attempts to kill him upon their meeting. Gunn tries to get to the bottom of it and speaks to two tipsters, but one is killed and the other refuses to talk. In some cues, Mancini deliberately writes in the score where something should happen in tandem with the music. For instance, specifically in the cue Plug, he writes in the staff above measure 14, "We see body." This notation indicates that the music must align with one of the directions either in the script for the camera or which Arnold dictated. So in addition to having accurate timings, he wanted to make sure everything lined up with words. Among these episode cues, there's a rare occasion that Mancini felt it important enough to indicate what's happening on the screen in the music. The music from that measure through the next one's very chromatic, that is, it ascends by half steps in the higher instruments. Slow moving ascending chromaticism in the mid-level instruments and thick chords in the lowest instruments. This music differs from that in the rest of the cue, forcing the audience to react when they see the body because they are also hearing something different. An unusual aspect of the score is also the cue Nighty Night. This uses a celesta, a keyboard instrument not typically found in jazz, and one that Mancini does not seem to use all that often throughout the series run. The celesta is a keyboard instrument that has a sort of twinkling timbre and draws attention to what's happening when it plays. Mancini also makes some of the episode's cues stand out, such as Pete Tailed. This cue is a short bridge with a piano ostinato or repeated music, with vibraphone and guitar notes played above it, and he specifies in the score no bass or drums. But this sparseness was also intentional. What was on the screen necessitated its short length. Mancini composed this cue to represent Gunn being followed, but he adds a large amount of reverberation to make the cue feel uncomfortable to the audience. This clip begins at 5 minutes and 40 seconds and ends at 6 minutes, 5 seconds. Vendetta, episode 36, also from 1959, season 1, also features an attempted murder, because almost all of them do. This time, it's the attempted murder of Edie. And this is a revenge for putting criminal Max Greco, played by Mark Lawrence, in jail for 3 years. Jacoby is still in the hospital from the events in Bullet for a Badge, and he tells Gunn that the likely assailant is Greco, because it's been 3 years since his imprisonment, and he promised upon his release that he would get even with Gunn. Despite Jacoby's insistence not to, Peter Gunn, being Peter Gunn, tries to track Greco down and have him arrested. As one might expect, Greco sets up a trap for Gunn, but Gunn thwarts it. Mancini composed 3 related cues that are variations on one another for this episode: Tape Trap Parts 1, 2, and 3. These cues feature repeated bass lines that move into sustained chords in the upper instruments. In Tape Trap 1, Mancini specifies the use of a percussion instrument common in late 1950s television, the boobams. Boobams, when struck, create a hollow sort of sound, and this sound continues without the boobam in Tape Trap 2. Here, the upper instruments are playing in parallel octaves over a repeated bass line, creating a hollow sound, with occasional quick chromatic septuplets. In Tape Trap Part 3, Mancini removes 2 of the core rhythm instruments in the ensemble, guitar and drums, leaving an empty sound and as the backbone of the piece are now gone. The hollowness of these 3 cues create a sense of disorientation as Gunn attempts to track down Greco and avoid all of his traps. The outlier of Arnold's directed episodes is The Hunt, which is episode 21 of season 2 from 1960. And this is the only episode that Arnold directed that did not air in season 1, and it was after a long hiatus from his first season episodes. Why Edwards asked Arnold to step in to direct this episode is unclear. In this episode, crime syndicate leader, played by Tony DiMario, pays a hitman, played by Gordon Oliver, to kill Peter Gunn. But Jacoby warns him about it, so he knows to be careful. Despite the warning, Gunn is kidnapped and driven to an abandoned mine to be murdered. This episode features an extended road scene in which a kidnapped Gunn is driving down a desert road with his kidnapper, reminiscent of the road movies and television shows that were so popular in the 1950s and 60s. This is one of the few scenes in the series that occurs not only during the day, but also in bright sun, which might have struck a lot of you as interesting when I put this slide up. This particular cue is accompanying this sort of outlier scene because it's not in that sort of noir look. All of the episode cues are based on walking bass lines and complex harmonies above them. And the road scene is a long cue that exemplifies this and reflects the scene's pacing. Mancini writes for marimba in many of this episode's cues, which is a similar instrument to vibraphone, but it lacks the motor and not typically used in jazz as vibraphones are. He pairs the marimba with the alto flute to give the score a deep, airy sound, reminiscent of the episode's location predominantly outdoors. This clip begins at 11 minutes and 22 seconds and ends at 14 minutes. when the pair enter into the cave, the music changes to a low register alto flute melody accompanied by a repeated bass line, played by low brass and guitar. Not only indicative of Gunn's attempt to escape, but the lack of sunlight in the cave. So compare this cue with this one that was above ground, bright sun. And this clip begins at 15 minutes and 36 seconds, and 17 minutes, 32 seconds is where it ends. Of course, as soon as he gets out of the cave, you start hearing those upper instruments. As I hope to have shown today, Arnold's directing style played a direct role in how Mancini chose to compose for the series while still staying within the confines of the genre and the show's established conventions. In these examples, we can hear how the music reflects Arnold's decisions about light and shadow, movement, and pacing. Within a single episode, Mancini's cues also demonstrate dramatic contrast that reflects the on-screen action. We can learn about Mancini's compositional style as directly influenced by the director with whom he worked in no matter what context, and Arnold's television directorial style by closely studying his Peter Gunn episodes. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Reba. Is this on? I turned it on. Can everybody hear me? All right, thank you, Reba. We've got time for questions, so if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring over a mic.
I know there's a lot to take in.
My question was how did the music differ in the episodes that were not directed by Jack Arnold?
So if you actually were to watch some of the episodes that were not directed by Arnold, you can hear a slight stylistic change. So from what I've been able to see and interpret, and also looking through the materials, a lot of what Mancini is doing is taking tone color and he's representing places in a different way than he does when things are directed by Edwards or others. So here he's actually using this direct use of tone color to represent darkness, light, the sort of shadiness of people versus people who are on the up and up. He uses a lot more melodies to represent people in the Arnold episodes than he does in the other episodes, which I find really interesting. And I'm not quite sure why. Jack Arnold's papers are nowhere to be found And I really wish they were somewhere, because I would love to see what Arnold had to say about all of these things and see what his interpretations are and his notes and the scripts and things like that. So we're only really going off what Mancini has and interpretations of the episode. So I would love to know if there was a particular reason why he composed differently for Arnold than he did for Edwards and others.
This is a little bit off topic, but I'm just curious. I remember that series when I was a kid. It was wonderful. What brought an end to it? Do you know?
I think the ratings had dropped, is what I'm remembering if I'm remembering correctly. That was the casualty of almost everything at that point. So yeah.
My question's about what do you call them? The sheets for the timing. Mm-hmm. So you said he would take the film home and. Like, was that did he handwrite those and then someone typed them? Like, what's the process of developing that, what you're showing on the left?
Yeah, usually what would happen is he would take notes, and he would confer with the director, the music supervisor, anyone else, on where they thought music should happen. And once they settled on it, he would compose, and then he would make those final notes that would then get typed up, and they would get put in the production file.
In your collection, are there the handwritten notes versions of those?
I haven't seen any.
No. I'm just curious where those went.
Yeah, same.
When I was a lot younger and had been watching the show, I found in a music store a book of the music from the show, which, despite the fact that I was a totally incompetent piano player, I tried to play, failed utterly. How much of that appeared as entire pieces in the show the way it did in the book I had and can no longer find?
Usually what would happen is they would get chopped up into snippets. So the show came out, and then Mancini somehow convinced the record company that it would be a good idea to release the music on its own in full onto a bunch of LPs. And so that's where you get the Music of Peter Gunn album, and then you get another album later that's more music from Peter Gunn, which is the actual title. And the sheet music followed that. And so it was a way to get the entire full cues out to people because they couldn't hear them usually in full in the actual episode. In fact, if you go on YouTube, you can hear the entire theme for Peter Gunn that you can't hear. Usually we hear a small snippet of it. But the entire theme for Peter Gunn, I think, is about 3 or 4 minutes long.
Yeah, thanks for the nice paper, Reba. I had a question. You mentioned the first season he had a kind of a scant orchestration, and then he added later. Was that adding the additional instruments, was that an aesthetic choice by him, or was it economic probably, or both, you think?
A little of both. So one thing that happened with union musicians is that they had a very particular pay scale. And every time there was a recording session, they would have to outline who was on the recording session. And they would outline usually what instruments were playing. And the reason why that was important is because if they were doubling or tripling on other instruments, they were required to get additional pay. And sometimes they would only indicate one instrument so that they didn't have to legally give them that additional pay. And so this was a way for him to circumvent the very small budget by not having to pay them extra, but also getting those aesthetics that he wanted. It happened not just with Mancini, it happened with almost everyone in television in the 50s and 60s.
That slide you showed about the budgets for different programs of that era, the question I had really is, how did Blake Edwards and the production company that he have focus on music as such an integral part, and was it customized for this show compared to some of these other programs that looked like they were just studio productions? Did they have different budgeting ways to do 77 Sunset Strip or any of the Universal shows at that time, or any of the studio series, which were sort of clones of each other in some ways. But I don't know if they even had the same music.
Yeah, so actually for 77 Sunset Strip, Sawtelle and Schachter had a very similar thing where they wrote a lot of new scores specifically for the episode and very rarely reused other ones. What wound up happening, and this is a very short Cliff Notes version, is that the networks would start using library music, which was music that was already written for other episodes and basically put on a shelf. They called it canned music because the roles were put on cans, and then put on a shelf. And they would dub it in as they could, so that because in the contracts it was often written that the composer did not have to get royalties once everything was recorded. So they can use it in perpetuity without giving royalties to the composer. And so it was a cheap way for them to actually get music into the episodes. The music union clamped down on that and basically said that for a 26 episode season, you had to have a minimum of 13 episodes of new music. And so they had to account for that. Now, there were, again, ways that they got around it. Sometimes they would take cues that already were written and they would change the name and put it on the cue sheet with the new name so that they didn't have to pay. And they could stay with the music union rules, and it was a whole big thing. But it was actually not uncommon for about 5% of an episode's budget to go into its music. The one exception that I can think of is The Outer Limits. And the only reason why that had such an exorbitant music budget is that the composer was also the producer of the series. And he did it until he could no longer get away with it.
Thanks for this talk. Really enjoyed it. My question is about this, if you know the status of the... Is this on? Did I lose it? Take two. If you know the status of the original session tapes from this, I know other 60s TV shows like Star Trek and The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Twilight Zone have the original recordings out there released digitally. Is there any chance of that happening for Peter Gunn?
I don't know. I know that they recently did a recording session of Mancini's music to re-record a lot of the titles, including Pink Panther and Peter Gunn. And they had some of the original session musicians who were alive, which are only two. Quincy Jones and John Williams are the only two who are still alive from the original recording sessions. So I know they tried to redo them. I don't know where the original session tapes are. I feel like if they're anywhere, they might be at UCLA because that's where a lot of the session tapes wound up. But they're not here, are they, Paul?
That I would know off the top of my head. Anything that came in with the Mancini collection that was AV was transferred over to the recorded sound division because the NAVCC has the right facilities to handle all of that. So that would be a question for them, for what may be in, or if it's copies of the masters, or who knows what.
Just curious about the production process. After the score was written and approved, was it like used in feature films where the musicians would go in a studio, watch the clip, and then record it accordingly?
Yep, they would record it, and then it would get dubbed in as necessary. And then it would go on. So it was a very short turnaround time. I heard some of you making gasps when I told you how quickly this went from the composition stage to the recording stage and air stage. That was very common. You'd be lucky if you got 2 weeks. And that was considered long back then.
Yeah, I could be mistaken on this, but I believe there are very few of these episodes, either Peter Gunn or Mr. Lucky, on YouTube. Who is the rights holder for these things? Do you know? And what's the block there?
So the Peter Rogers organization is who owns the rights to this. So I had originally contacted NBC because I was working with the 2 seasons that NBC had aired it, and they had pointed me to Peter Rogers. Peter Rogers' organization, I spent about a month trying to get a hold of them. They don't answer their phone, they don't answer emails. So I think the Library of Congress tried, had a couple other people who do copyright stuff try, and nobody could get a hold of them. So it doesn't surprise me that if more episodes went on YouTube, they wouldn't get shut down because it doesn't seem like the Peter Rogers organization is really paying much attention to this sort of thing. But they're technically the ones who, as I was told by NBC, own the rights to the series.
Do you know if any of the episodes appear on Internet Archive or any other source on the internet?
You can find it on cable. You can find it on Pluto, I think, and Tubi should also have them.
Pluto and what was the other?
Tubi, T-U-B-I. And I know definitely for Pluto it's on demand. So if you type in Peter Gunn, you'll get the whole run of the series.
For under Kudo or where?
On Pluto, yeah.
Thank you.
It's an organization that deals with film and television rights. So, yeah. Yeah, exactly, assuming it still exists. Now watch, somebody will see it, I'll get angry mail from them. Right.
I think let's go ahead and thank Dr. Wissner one more time.